From 1993 to 1996, the homicide rate in the United States dropped by 20%. During those same 3 years, coverage of homicides broadcasted on the evening news increased by an average of 721%.
The biggest threat to U.S. democracy.
They will jump you, they will rob you.
We are one incident away from history's most destructive war.
Fear is a very powerful tool, used to unite tribes, justify wars, and enforce societal norms. Fear-mongering has not only shaped entire belief systems, it's shaped entire societies. Historically, leaders have exploited fear to manipulate public perception, maintain control, and suppress dissent. From the Roman Empire's expansion, leveraging the threat of barbarian invasions, to modern-day political campaigns. This strategy was adopted by corporations during the rise of mass media. Newspapers, which were once the dominant source of information to the public, mastered the art of sensationalism. This practice laid the groundwork for what would become a media staple, the prioritization of engaging content at the expense of a more detailed, nuanced reporting. When radio and television began to overtake the newspapers, this strategy got even more powerful. You see, no longer were you just reading about some event in a newspaper. You could now hear the urgency in the broadcaster's voice. You could see the events unfold live right on your television screen. The immediacy and emotional impact of broadcast media allowed for fear-based messages to be delivered with compelling visuals and dramatic narratives. This not only struck a deeper chord with the audience, but expanded viewership, as people tune in more frequently for updates on the latest threat to their family, their neighborhood, or the planet. With the 24-hour news cycle, this only got worse. Networks faced with the task of filling endless hours of broadcasting time often recycle dramatic stories, speculate wildly about potential dangers, and inflate minor incidents into crises. This transformation of the media landscape into a continuous loop of sensationalism blurs the line between information and entertainment, and this profoundly affects public discourse. If you're an American, I'm going to assume that you've been trick-or-treating, and if you have been, then you've probably heard stories of people passing out poisoned candy or apples with razor blades inside of them. It's a story that's been told so long that I, someone who was born at the tail end of the 90s, grew up having my parents forcibly inspect my candy. The story is from the mid-70s, and like every horror franchise, gets a modern reboot every couple of years. In August of 2022, the Drug Enforcement Administration warned parents to watch out for fentanyl-laced pills that looked like candy. They said these drugs were designed specifically to get kids and young adults addicted to fentanyl. Over the next 2 months, major news outlets, such as CBS News, Fox News, and Good Morning America, would try their best to link these pills to Halloween. There were over 1,000 stories published in the days leading up to October 31st, intensifying fears about fentanyl pills masquerading as Halloween candy, with no real substance to back these claims up. And as it would turn out, no child was given these pills during Halloween. In fact, there's not been a single case where a child has ever been poisoned by candy given to them by a stranger. This urban legend started because of one case in 1974, where a father poisoned his own son and his friend's Halloween candy in order to claim life insurance money. Yet this story remains a staple in the media because it captures attention, it drives traffic, and it triggers emotional responses that keep audiences coming back. These stories, they're not merely reported, they're sold, repackaged as must-see spectacles that help sustain an endless cycle of viewer engagement and anxiety. It raises the question, how many of these stories reflect the truth, and how many are designed purely to stoke fear for the sake of viewership? This is a prime example of how sensationalism is often prioritized over accurate reporting, demonstrating how fear can be propagated, often irresponsibly, by authorities and the media alike. Every election cycle is marked by pervasive fear-mongering tactics politicians use to exploit any apprehensions about the other side and secure votes for themselves. And it doesn't help that in today's fast-paced media landscape, sensational news stories tend to spread faster than actual credible news. That's why I'm excited to introduce today's sponsor, Ground.News. They're the only sponsor I've ever chosen to partner with because I believe their platform is not just useful, but essential for anyone who wants to be truly informed about issues that directly impact our daily lives. Ground.News sorts related news articles from their network of over 50,000 sources every day to create these comprehensive story overviews so readers can truly understand what's going on from every perspective. For example, college student Laken Riley was tragically murdered in February while out on a jog. But because the murderer was a Venezuelan immigrant in the country illegally, her death quickly became the center of the U.S. immigration debate. Looking at the Ground.News overview, based on the 65 articles they found reporting on this, I can read a summary from the left center, and right perspectives. But how they're framing the story, though, is what's really interesting. On the left, the headline says, Laken Riley deserves justice, not to be exploited as a symbol of xenophobia or hate. And on the right, it's Donald Trump slams Joe Biden for illegal migrant invasion and highlights nursing students' brutal murder. Two completely different takes on the exact same story. Keep in mind, politicians from every side fearmonger. Ground.News just makes it easier to point out. They not only illustrate the biases present across platforms, but they also show you the reliability of the sources' reporting practices and the transparency into who funds these media outlets. Especially during an election year, it's crucial you get the full picture, ensuring that your decisions are informed by a diverse array of perspectives rather than a single narrative. You can go to Ground.News/tie or click the link in the description to get 40% off their Vantage plan, which is what I'm using to get unlimited access to all of their features. In 1994, as homicide rates were steadily decreasing, one man would single-handedly reshape the media landscape forever. That man was O.J. Simpson. When O.J.'s ex-wife was killed along with her friend, the media ignited like a wildfire. The shocking nature of the crime, allegedly perpetrated by arguably one of the greatest running backs of all time, immediately captured the nation's attention. And it really heated up just days after their deaths with that infamous O.J. White Bronco police chase. An event so iconic that even the children's film Shrek 2 parodied it.
We got a white Bronco heading east into the forest, requesting backup.
The White Bronco chase, which only lasted about an hour, was so highly covered, it was the highest rated program of the year for basic cable. This hour-long chase got more viewers than the fucking Super Bowl. But it wouldn't really be until the trial began in January of '95 that the media frenzy would reach an entirely new level. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a national drama that unfolded daily in front of millions of viewers and fundamentally changed how the public consumed news. The trial, often referred to as the trial of the century, is credited for demonstrating the viability of the 24-hour news cycle. Major networks like CNN provided unprecedented coverage on every aspect of the proceedings. The trial also arguably paved the way for the explosion of reality television, not only by blurring the lines between information and entertainment, but also by elevating the Kardashian family to celebrity status. The O.J. Simpson trial, with its compelling mix of celebrity, race, and crime, created an ideal scenario for media outlets to capitalize on, and the public took notice. Over 150 million people tuned in to watch the verdict. This trial fundamentally changed America and its media landscape. Its influence on American society continues to shape both public discourse and media practices to this day. In the fall of 1995, while the O.J. Simpson trial was still dominating headlines, a relatively unknown journalist at the news magazine The Weekly Standard found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. Returning from lunch early one day, he was casually asked by a receptionist if he knew anything about the O.J. Simpson trial. 48 Hours, a CBS program, had reached out to the magazine looking for someone to discuss the case on television. Although the journalist would later admit that he knew relatively little about the case, he decided to seize the opportunity, and by the end of the day, he was on a flight to New York for his television debut. That journalist, Tucker Carlson, would later write in his memoir, "If O.J. Simpson hadn't murdered his wife, I probably wouldn't be working in television." That unexpected debut on 48 Hours showed Carlson that his ability to engage viewers, despite his admitted lack of knowledge on the trial, would be enough to carve out a niche in television journalism. What did he know about the Simpson case that the rest of the population didn't? Was he truly the most qualified person to explain the effects of the trial on American society? And if not, why was he pretending to be? And why was a major news network allowing him to do it? This insight into the distinct nature of television journalism guided Carlson's career decisions and on-air style. He embraced the medium's unique requirements, focusing on how to present issues in ways that resonated with viewers, sometimes at the expense of diving into complex factual details. This approach allowed him to rise rapidly in the world of cable news, where the ability to engage and provoke became as valuable, if not more so, than the ability to inform. By the early 2000s, Carlson had established himself as a prominent television personality. He was co-hosting his second CNN program, where he debated the day's headlines from a conservative standpoint, and was interviewing a variety of different celebrities about complex political issues. By the mid-2000s, he was hosting his own show on MSNBC, as well as appearing on season 3 of Dancing with the Stars.
An awful mess, free!
But as MSNBC increasingly leaned towards a more progressive editorial stance, Carlson's conservative perspectives often clashed with the broader direction of the network and the typical MSNBC viewers. After the cancellation of his show in 2008, Carlson embarked on what could be seen as a somewhat surprising venture. In late late 2009, he co-founded the conservative news website, The Daily Caller. Nowadays, the site is basically a sensationalist, rage-bait content farm, but it didn't start that way. Initially, Carlson aimed to create a platform that mirrored the rigorous journalistic standards of big dogs like the New York Times, but from a conservative perspective.
If you create a news organization whose primary objective is not to deliver accurate news, you will fail. The New York Times is a liberal paper, but it's a paper that actually cares about accuracy. Conservatives need to build institutions that mirror those institutions. That's the truth. They are still out there finding the facts and bringing them to people. And you can believe it or not, but conservatives need to mimic that in their own news organizations.
He envisioned the Daily Caller as a source of credible news and thoughtful analysis. But within months, the site ended up devolving into what it's known for today, and growing significantly after doing so. It turns out, and this might not shock you, that there isn't a significant conservative audience interested in a more objective, fact-based news approach. The target audience that Carlson aimed for was barely a blip on the radar. This realization, perhaps, foreshadowed Carlson's trajectory as he made his way to Fox News. At Fox, Tucker found a platform that not only embraced, but celebrated the type of sensationalism that he had tried to avoid earlier in his career. After co-hosting Fox and Friends Weekend, his provocative commentary and ability to continuously stir the pot didn't go unnoticed.
Whenever politics intrudes on art, it distorts and corrupts the art. It makes it less good. That's why Soviet realism was mostly garbage.
Less than a week after Donald Trump won the presidency, Fox, who was looking for more opinionated programs, handed him the keys to his own primetime show, Tucker Carlson Tonight.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson's on Happy Monday. Things are changing fast.
Here, he shaped the news into narratives that resonated deeply with his viewers, turning his broadcast into a nightly spectacle that millions tuned into religiously.
Tucker Carlson Tonight, thank you for watching. We appreciate it. In case you haven't noticed, it's hard to trust anything you hear right now.
In his book, The Culture of Fear, sociologist Barry Glassner wrote, "Fearmongers deploy narrative techniques to normalize what are actually errors in reasoning." Tucker managed to do this almost every night, employing a range of fear-mongering tactics that were both captivating and concerning. There's really 4 fundamental pillars: exaggeration, scapegoating, conspiracy theorizing, and promoting an us versus them mentality. You can pull up almost any Tucker Carlson Tonight clip, and you're bound to recognize at least 3 of these. It would take a biblical-sized book to go through a show that aired 5 nights a week for 6 years and break down just how often he misled his audience. Instead, I'm just going to show one clip to provide a glimpse into this approach and his impact.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We're having a lot of gun control debates this week. If you wanted to stop murder, you would focus on the people who are committing murder, not on the hundreds of millions of their neighbors who are not. Our leaders are determined not to know why people shoot each other, and they don't want us to know either. They're adamant that we do not ask questions about motive. It seems, for example, like an awful lot of mass shooters have taken prescription psychiatric drugs in the days before they opened fire and killed others. Have you noticed that? Maybe you have noticed that. Good luck saying it in public. You'll be shouted down immediately by someone with an advanced degree. How dare you criticize Big Pharma?
The next day, a screenshot began making the rounds alleging that 90% of school shooters could be linked back to antidepressants. This is not true, but expanding on Tucker's thoughts, out of all mass shootings in the United States, 23% of shooters are on psychiatric medication during the time they commit attacks. School shooters are even less likely to be on psychiatric medication, with the total coming to around 12%. But Tucker didn't just say this randomly. He segued this conversation into an argument that the trans movement was deliberately targeting Christians. 2 days before this video was posted, a trans individual walked into a Christian elementary school and killed 6 people. This is the deadliest mass shooting in Tennessee history. While it's not hard to believe that the location of this attack was purposeful, the shooter's manifesto still has not been publicly released. The reason for this, Tucker claims,
that evidence includes a written manifesto where the killer spells out exactly why she killed children. And yet somehow the Attorney General informs us that a motive has not yet been identified. Well, he's lying. They all are lying. We can't see the manifesto because the transgender lobby, which has far more power than you do, has pressured politicians to keep it hidden.
In reality, it's because the killer themselves did not publish it online, and it's technically a part of an open investigation with a release scheduled for whenever that will close. Except a group of parents whose children attend the school, and possibly the parents of children that were killed that day, do not want the manifesto released and are doing everything they can to stop that. Tucker, who fancies himself a defender of Christians, is contradicting the wishes of the Christian parents who were directly affected by that attack.
Because the transgender lobby, which has far more power than you do, has pressured politicians to keep it hidden. But we can be certain what it says. Monday's victims were murdered because they were Christians. It's that simple. Transgenderists hate Christians above all, not because Christians are a physical threat, but because Christians refuse to join every other liar in our society and proclaim that transgenderists are gods with the power to change nature itself. Christians are not allowed to say that. They have their own God.
The manifesto would eventually be partly leaked, and that leak only shows that the killer was obsessed with killing people because they were white. The killer themselves was also white. This person was very obviously a piece of shit and did absolutely nothing to help the trans movement. But going off what we know for a fact, you can't say the killer was simply looking to kill Christians. But even if that were true, that doesn't justify the conclusion Tucker comes to, that the trans movement as a whole is targeting Christians, much less the implication that the trans movement is targeting Christians through violence. But so-called trans allies made this narrative very easy for him to paint.
The press secretary for the governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, someone called Jocelyn Berry, who was just resigned apparently, uploaded this photograph hours after the killing along with the message, "Us when we see transphobes." In other words, the Christians had it coming. Don't affirm our delusions, we will murder you.
After this shooting, many conservatives began spreading the idea that trans and non-binary individuals were committing mass shootings at a rapidly increasing pace. Most notably, former president's son Donald Trump Jr. stated that there was a clear epidemic of trans mass shooters.
Oh my God, folks, it's literally happening. Remember, folks, there's a clear epidemic of trans or non-binary mass shooters, people who, according to the CDC, make up 0.6% of the adult population of this country. You add in children and it's significantly less. The media is totally silent, except for to blame you or to call you a bigot for pointing out the trend.
In the years since, there has been 2 additional shootings that online posters and right-wing media outlets have blamed on the trans community. It's important that you realize one of these shooters never actually claimed to be trans, and it didn't even result in a mass shooting. Regardless, if you lump this person into the trans statistics, that then makes 6 trans shooters out of the 3,475 shootings that have taken place from 2018 to 2024 so far, which makes trans individuals, who are 0.5% to 1.6% of the adult population, 0.17% of all mass shooters, meaning it's actually less likely for a mass shooter to be trans than the average population rate would suggest. But this statistic is a little misleading. The 3,000 figure takes into account all shootings where at least 4 people are injured. Much of these are personal disputes or organized crime related. It doesn't make much sense to lump these in when talking about indiscriminate mass violence. The Violence Project, a non-profit that tracks mass shootings not related to personal disputes or criminal activity, found that approximately 1 in every 200 mass shooters identifies as transgender, which aligns with the lowest estimated percentage of the trans population. At the end of the day, these are just numbers. But to give these numbers some real perspective, if you're an American, in any given year, you're about 67 times less likely to be shot by a trans mass shooter than you are to be struck by lightning. Regardless of how you personally feel about the trans movement, the statement or idea that there's an epidemic of trans mass shooters, and those shooters are not just targeting Christians, but supported by the trans community, is not just misleading, it's not true. And this idea is pushed by major right-wing news media to point the finger at a very small minority of the population because it gets attention. Fox News, like any major media conglomerate, operates on a very simple principle. Eyeballs equals dollars. And what gets more eyeballs than fear, outrage, and controversy? The trans community is just the latest scapegoat. Whether it's blaming video games, music, movies, or medication, the pattern is crystal clear.
Have you noticed that?
Carlson's penchant for controversial and misleading narratives would eventually catch up with him in April of 2023 when he was ousted by Fox News following a $700 million lawsuit. While Carlson might be the poster boy for media scare tactics, make no mistake, he's just one cog in a well-oiled machine. Long before Carlson ever appeared on Fox News, pioneers like Rush Limbaugh and Roger Ailes were already fine-tuning the art of turning fear into ratings. And while the right has become synonymous with using fear to rally around cultural issues, on the left, fearmongering takes a different shape, often centered around more political or environmental concerns. The best example of this is climate change, maybe second only to the media's reporting on COVID-19. Critics on the right have accused left-leaning media outlets, commentators, politicians, and scientists of misleading the public and engaging in fear-mongering tactics when talking about the current state of climate change. But the more you look into these claims, you'll find that generally, the predictions have been accurate. While there are, of course, examples of predictions not coming to fruition, the majority of their claims have been supported by scientific evidence and have materialized to some extent. During the pandemic, left-leaning media outlets initially focused on worst-case scenarios, tipping into alarmist portrayals that promoted fear, while right-leaning media outlets reacted by downplaying the pandemic's severity. This weird media ping-pong, where each side dramatically countered the other's narrative, resulted in a fragmented and biased public view. This dynamic not only confused the public, but eroded trust in media and institutions, which paved the way for alternative news media and commentators to blossom. Even Tucker Carlson now hosts his own show on his own network, where he interviews notable politicians, commentators, and hillbillies. And while Tucker was already a well-known media personality, this represents a shift in how media is consumed and produced nowadays. Fear-mongering is no longer an exclusive power wielded by governments and mass media corporations. Now, it's in the hands of you. You now have the ability to share your fear-based messages to a global audience instantly without any editorial oversight. And the best part is, the more outrageous, the more sensational, controversial, or fear-inducing your posts are, the more these social media algorithms are inclined to push that content. Cable is essentially in free fall. A majority of Americans don't even have cable anymore. And when it comes to getting news online, while news websites and apps are still preferred by Americans, currently, 30% of people worldwide prefer getting their news from social media, opting for quick, digestible news bites over traditional lengthy articles. And when it comes to how young adults and those under 18 are consuming news, platforms like YouTube and TikTok aren't just alternate news sources, they're the new prime time. And as these platforms grow, they reshape what news is and how it's delivered. It's not just about reporting news, it's about creating a spectacle that resonates with viewers. It's about selling a narrative. This is seen most egregiously on Twitter, where the rapid spread of misinformation is a significant issue. Popular accounts often selectively omit information to mislead their audience and push a certain agenda. Twitter has attempted to mitigate this through the use of community notes, which allows users to add context or corrections to tweets. But the effectiveness of this is still limited, and so much information is posted so rapidly, it's impossible to correct everything. YouTube, on the other hand, is like stepping into the wild, wild west. On YouTube, there's no formal system like community notes to check facts. Instead, it falls to other YouTubers to call out misinformation. YouTube videos can span hours, presenting complex narratives that are not as easily dissected or fact-checked as a simple tweet. This increasingly becomes a problem as more people are turning to YouTube and similar platforms for news and information. As audiences shift from traditional news sources to independent influencers, the potential for misinformation skyrockets. The result is a place where spectacle overshadows substance, and where the lines between entertainment, opinion, and actual facts are increasingly blurred, where creators will say nearly anything that might draw views and engagement, because that means more money. Beyond the overtly political content that clearly marks its territory, there are those that are more subtle, channels that, at least initially, were presented as neutral or even educational. A notable one goes by the name of Moon. This channel, and others like it, start by covering seemingly neutral or nonpartisan topics to attract a diverse audience. However, over time, their videos have increasingly taken on the characteristics of propaganda. They cleverly weave popular culture, humor, and current events into their content to appeal to younger audiences, but subtly frame issues in ways that discredit or criticize opposing viewpoints, frequently attributing societal or political problems to progressive ideologies. This method, while initially resembling the objective style of channels like James Johnny or Magnates Media, has gradually veered into promoting misinformation and misleading narratives. And it's not even very subtle anymore. Just going off Moon's thumbnails, you'd be inclined to believe that he blames the gays for why companies are going broke, why Canada is hell, why Gen Z sucks, why Pixar is collapsing, why Americans are stupid, why Americans are weak, with a thumbnail featuring a British gay man and a German. And this is a very common issue for him. Although his thumbnails appear to, at least in part, blame gays or progressive ideology for a lot of societal issues, the videos themselves never really justify that claim, at times not even mentioning gay people, and sometimes seem to even critique the media for exaggerating the significance of progressive movements.
Most people in Canada remain completely unaffected by these policies, and the Canadians who are affected by these policies are generally satisfied with the way they're written. But the news gives you a whole other side of this, as though this is infecting everything.
But he frequently magnifies small or isolated issues to create sensational content, engaging in the same type of exaggeration he criticizes. This disconnect between the thumbnails and the video content is a move to capitalize on controversial clicks, which unfortunately also spreads misinformation and stirs unnecessary division, especially pertaining to America. His videos are very American-centric, talking about American politics, culture, and society, which is a little strange, considering he himself is not American. His entire channel is based around extreme fear and negativity, usually with very little self-awareness.
Develops echo chambers, where you're always provided surface level knowledge, extracted from an algorithm designed to evoke your emotions. The algorithm's pressure to be as bombastic, outrageous, and alarming as possible means that you never really need to stick to the facts. And all of this content can usually be incredibly misleading. People will see and engage with things that make their beliefs seem right, or things that make the opposition seem stupid and wrong. They specifically feed people rage baits.
There's never a silver lining with this guy, whether it's failing companies, moral degradation, or cultural collapse. Moon seems to have fashioned himself as this arbiter of the harsh truths, but these so-called truths are often distortions or exaggerations. He'll cherry pick events and figures that support his narrative. In his video, The Most Disturbing Crimes of Politicians, he begins the video talking about Hunter Biden, notably never a politician. But he tries to rope in Joe Biden, mostly citing the Twitter files that have since been discredited, even by Twitter's own lawyers. Later in the video, he talks about Nancy Pelosi, insinuating that she is at fault for Gitmo torture methods.
You see, back in 2002, Nancy both knew and approved some of the extreme torture methods used in Guantanamo Bay,
criticizes some smaller things,
and she became hated by Republicans, most famously when she disrespected Donald Trump during a State of the Nation address.
And then dives into her investing history, which is a common topic and potentially a very real issue. But it's not so much about what he includes as what he doesn't include. Besides the long history of horrible shit that politicians have done far worse than any modern politician, notably absent is the January 6th Capitol riots, or the continued denial of the election results by Donald Trump and his supporters. I find this especially strange because just months before January 6th happened, Moon said the following in his now deleted video, "Why I Left the Left."
Because freedom of speech has been stifled by these anodyne cliche jabs, shouting racist, homophobic, sexist at any chance. And yet, when you turn on the news, we are constantly told that the right want to destroy inclusivity and create division. And yet every time the left was defeated, there's only one side that refuses to accept democracy. There's only one side that spills out into the streets and has a public hissy fit in response to losing a fair vote. There's only one side.
Moon's selective amnesia regarding January 6th pushes a false narrative that serves his purpose, and in turn, does what he consistently accuses the mainstream media of doing. He says the left incites division and suppresses free speech, and while that's not entirely wrong, his own curated narrative blinds the audience to the divisive and destructive actions from his preferred side, all under the guise of being objective. This only contributes to the polarized climate he claims to critique. His channel contains dozens, potentially hundreds of misleading claims and oversights, and there's no actual accountability. Moon has a very impersonal attachment to his channel. This is best seen by the few times he's been called out for straight up stealing videos, and in response, he doesn't respond. Moon taps into a very real sense of disillusionment people have with social media, mainstream media, and the internet at large. And that's why I'm inclined to believe that he at least initially started out with good intentions. But he seems to have fully embraced this idea of just becoming another content farm, pumping out videos he probably didn't write almost on a daily basis to farm more views and therefore more money. And his own viewers have taken notice. And if this couldn't be more clear, despite rightfully calling out many of the fake gurus and online course creators, he even recently started his own program. For $5 a month, you can join if you want to learn how to make the same types of videos he does. And this isn't the first time he's tried to do this. Last year, he did this thing called Moon School of Living, and he was selling that for $99, and that failed, I guess, so he shut it down. Who knew that building a channel on the dangers of digital overindulgence would backfire when trying to sell subscriptions for more screen time? And look, Moon is just one channel. He's not the reason people are attracted to bad news. He's not even one of the most extreme fearmongers on the platform.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson.
But his slick presentation and this guise of neutrality make him one of the most subtly effective spreaders of fear and misinformation. This digital fearmongering that creators like Moon engage in isn't just about views either. It can have serious real-world impacts. These platforms shape perceptions, and in extreme cases, they can shape actions. People often complain about the type of videos that gain popularity nowadays, but the reality is, where you direct your attention algorithm ultimately decides what type of content thrives. Every click, subscription, and share contributes to a system that favors sensationalism over substance. Before you click on the next sensational video, take a moment to pause and reflect. Are you really going to gain insight from this? Or are you simply fueling a machine that profits from fear? By making better choices, maybe we can foster a digital landscape that excels by prioritizing truth and constructive discourse over fear and division. But I doubt it.